I'm happy to introduce Tine Destrooper and Jef de Slegte from Ghent University and Vrije Universiteit Brussel, who are in the PostGenAI program here at the Institute. And we will be speaking about a cross-case analysis of the representation of victims, protagonists in truth commission narratives using LLMs with human-in-the-loop evaluation. Thank you so much for joining us and feel free to share your screens.
Thanks a lot. And thanks to you, Paulius, and the whole Institute for giving us this chance to be here. And thanks also to all the speakers, Eleanor, David, Jorge. That was so inspiring. And Steve, I'm very much looking forward to your talk. We are here as part of the PostGenAI network to collaborate on a project, a joint project which has evolved quite a bit since we got accepted for this program, as you will certainly notice from the advanced or not so advanced nature of our remarks, which are mostly perspective, I would say. You can also see that it's an embryonic project from the catchy title that we had come up with so far. But basically, the project we're going to be working on is on how victims, protagonists are represented in especially the reports of truth commissions. And we want to use LLMs, large language models, with human in the loop to do that. I'll say a bit more about why we felt it made sense to do so, especially given that for both of us, this is quite far out of what we far away from what we normally do. I am normally a critical transitional justice scholar, work qualitatively, socio-legal and anthropological methods, and Jef is a data scientist. So for both of us, this is quite uncharted territory. It's very much an experiment. And today we'll tell you a bit more about what exactly the debates are that we are going to speak to. So what the role of victims, protagonists, and truth commissions is. Then also how we feel that there's room for looking at how we might be able to bridge critical transitional justice scholarship and human rights scholarship more generally, really, with advanced computational methods. And then Jef will also talk a bit more about what we want to be doing the coming months. So first, to speak to the broad debates that we want to be talking to, and I'm sorry, there's a bit of a delay on the slides, I noticed. But basically, the topic or that the project we're going to be doing here is very firmly inscribed in critical transitional justice scholarship, which is what I bring to the project, let's say, and transitional justice, or TJ as I'll also call it, basically refers to the whole wide range of mechanisms that societies adopt or put in place to address legacies most of the time, sometimes ongoing, mass violence, authoritarianism, apartheid, but also increasingly a very broad range of systematic human rights abuses. So you could think of trials, of reparation programs, of institutional reform, like rewriting a constitution, but also memory projects. And then for today, we are mostly going to be focusing on truth commissions, which are also one of the elements of the toolkit, if you will, of transitional justice. And the reason we want to look at truth commissions is because typically those are considered to be the TJ mechanism that is more oriented towards giving a space and a voice to victims' protagonists, which is because they have a very different way of operating than, let's say, a cross case or a cross-examination in a criminal case, for example, which is very adversarial, which is in a way geared towards undermining the credibility of victims who are giving testimony. Whereas truth commissions are typically considered to be a forum where victims can tell about the experiences they have had, the experiences of harm, in ways that are closer to their to that experience, and so to contribute to the writing of the historical narrative about that violence. But of course, as I already said, I very much come from a critical transitional justice background. A lot of critiques have been raised of transitional justice, most of them very justified, but one very important one to my work is the critique that most institutional or formal transitional justice mechanisms typically find it very hard to adequately include victims' protagonists, but also to adequately represent their voices, their demands, their agency, but also really their situated experiences of both harm and their experience with a specific transitional justice intervention. That critique basically also holds for truth commissions, even if they are more open to victims' voices than say criminal court. They are still often semi-judicial mechanisms, institutionalized bodies. So a lot of critical literature has also been focusing on the persisting issue of erasure, of invisibilization that is also happening at truth commissions. And I think that erasure is a reality that most people in my field would agree on. But what we know much less about is how that erasure, for example, takes on very different shapes and very different contexts, and which factors help to explain why and when and what elements of victim testimony, for example, are erased from the narrative of a truth commission. And by narrative, I mean both the reports that come out of a truth commission, but also transcripts that are made publicly available, mandates, press releases, etc. Now, before turning to our specific research question, one important, not disclaimer, but context that I want to give is that even if this project is very much focused on the participation of victims in these institutional and these formal invited spaces, where we come from, and the other work that we do is very much one which is much more oriented towards victims as drivers of the transitional justice process. So both, if we look at the origins of transitional justice, we see that victims were really at the heart of TJ in Latin America. Many Latin American countries, it was really the victims, the families of the disappeared, who took to the streets to know about the fate of their loved ones. And that is the heart of transitional justice. And then, of course, there was an institutional response to those demands. Victims participated often in those institutions that were put in place. But what we see is that even when let's say, formal transitional justice institution, like the ones that we initially consider in this project, when such an institution is established, that then still you often see that in the orbit thereof, there is still a lot of victim activism, a lot of victim protagonism happening. Can we move to the next slide? Thank you. For example, in Guatemala, there was a UN-backed truth commission, a formal truth commission, but at the same time, and really actually also temporally around the same time, there was also a very massive truth initiative that was set up by the church. A bit later, there was a truth initiative that was set up by indigenous women. So also these unofficial truth projects, if you will. And then to this day, we see that basically a lot of the context for TJ is used today. It's not pushed by institutions, it's not pushed by states, but it's very often really victim groups that are pushing for truth initiatives to be put in place, for other kinds of transitional justice mechanisms to be put in place. I'm saying that just as a context, on the one hand, to really say that in the work that we do, we see victims as much more than participants, but really as protagonists, despite the focus now on formal institutions. And also to give you an impression of how diverse this landscape of transitional justice initiatives is, and specifically even of truth projects is. So we're really looking at a very diverse set of practices, and as a consequence, also a very unwieldy set of documents to look at. If we look, for example, at just only the official truth commissions that there have been, depending on how you count, there have been more than 80 worldwide, and even much more if you would also count unofficial truth projects. Now, our project is rooted in the reality that there's been excellent analyses on, I think, almost each and every one of those. But at this point, there's not really a comparative or a cross-case analysis that could help us understand, for example, how institutional setup, how context, etc., might affect the role of victims. Partly, TJ is typically a discipline, I would say, or a field of scholarship that was very much dominated by legal scholars, later also increasingly by qualitative scholars, and we really want to be building on insights from these qualitative single-end case studies about victims' experiences of truth-telling, how they resist silencing, how they shape political spaces, which is also, by the way, where my experience lies. But we want to go a step beyond that, and if we could move to the next slide. At the same time, we have also seen that since the 2010s or so, there's really been an explosion of databases, of more quantitative projects. Databases which do allow for a cross-national comparison for large and statistical analysis. But for me, what's very frustrating about these databases is that they come with trade-offs. Often what they code is a relatively small set of predefined indicators. Was a truth commission state-backed? Yes or no? How long did it last? What types of violations did it investigate? So very highly structured information, which says very little about the actual substance or the narrative of that report. It says even less about the context. And what these methods then do not, or these databases do not allow us to do, is to really deal with unstructured corpora like the ones that we are interested in, which is all these commissions of these, or all these reports of these truth commissions and written materials that they have produced. So our project wants to explore how we can bridge that desire on the one hand to hold on or to build on that rich contextual understanding, but also to engage in a cross-case analysis. And how we want to do that is we really want to look at some of the advances that have been made in computational methods to see what is possible, keeping in mind, of course, that these come with massive risks, challenges, ethical challenges also, which we'll talk about in a second. In a substantive sense, our research question is interested in how victims are represented in these truth projects, but underlying that, of course, is really an important methodological component of a very fundamental question of how relevant these computational methods are or can be made to, for example, studies that try to be victim and human rights centric, which is, of course, a very big concern for the human rights community and the human rights research community. We are currently carving out a set of questions that we want to be studying for this experiment, which are based on the one hand on secondary literature and then also my experience working in a number of contexts where victim participation has been important in truth commissions. So the first question is, do victims get to speak in, for example, truth commission reports, or are they spoken about? The second is, which identities and groups of victims are most prevalent? Is it the typical kind of women and children trope, or is there also space for more complex victim identities? For example, people who also have perpetrator identities, is that represented? The main question is, which narrative frames are used when victims are discussed in these materials? Is it rather one of suffering, or is there also attention for resilience, for agency, for resistance, etc.? And then also, how are demands discussed? Now, as to how we will do this and how we will use LLMs to do this, I'm going to pass the floor to Jef. I think that's for the best of everyone, and then I'll come back with a concluding remark at the end.
All right. Thank you. So indeed, our attempt is to answer these questions using LLMs, large language models. And why is that? Now, over the past few years, large language models have transformed many fields of research. LLMs, in summary, they're AI models that are trained on an enormous amount of data. So internet articles, web pages, news items, you name it. Basically, it's trained on the whole internet, basically, and actually based on this training data, essentially, if you give a set of words to an LLM, it predicts actually the next word. That's the simplistic definition of an LLM that I can give. Now, it has advanced in such a way and in a very rapid way that you now can prompt an LLM with any request. And it will provide you with an answer. And this prompt, this can be a piece of text, this can be a picture. It is able to deal with it and to provide an answer. And that's why we think that they are suitable for text generation, for summarization, but also for classification. And they can even detect subtle patterns, but also sentiments across a vast amount of documents. And for transitional justice, this opens a possibility that we can use LLMs to analyze the archives of truth commission reports, mandates, proceedings, and unofficial projects. But we are also deeply aware of the critiques, as mentioned before. So LLMs are often accused of bias, erasure. They can hallucinate often. There's also decontextualization. And these are precisely the kinds of problems that critical TJ scholars has long warned against. So we do not approach these models with blind faith. Instead, we treat them as tools to be critically appropriated, carefully fine-tuned, and always combined with human judgment. Now, that human judgment, this we will reflect in this project by a methodological innovation that we want to introduce or that we want to use, which is called human in the loop. And this means that we do not rely on the model's output at face value. Instead, every step of fine-tuning and evaluation involves close collaboration between social scientists who bring theoretical and ethnographic expertise and data scientists who bring then the technological knowledge of model training and the fine-tuning of the model. So let me go to what is a typical or what is a baseline LLM flow to analyze text. So essentially, you feed the model with a vast corpora of different types of text. This can be testimonies, this can be sections from Truth Commission reports, press releases, you name it. And you actually conduct some kind of data processing step and also cleaning step before you enter, let's say, it in a document database. And while you load it in a database, you actually create segments of these texts. And afterwards, each of these segments you will prompt an LLM to do an analysis on each of this segment of text. Now, what are you exactly prompting this LLM? This will be stored in the prompt repository. And essentially, it represents our research questions that we want to prompt the LLM over here. Now, and then the output is then stored in what we call the victim representation database and is essentially a table with all the different documents. Every document that is then divided in a segment, and every segment has then a certain classification. Now, LLMs nowadays are able to, besides do this classification, also provide reasoning for that classification. So it's a kind of chain of thought to come to this classification. And that is exactly what we want to use and what we will drive our human in the loop, essentially. And the human in the loop itself is a response to the critiques of LLMs being black boxes and that we don't know why the output is what it is, and also the critique that it causes erasure. Now, what actually happens is that, human researchers review a random sample of the outputs and when necessary, correcting it with contextual insights. So where we agree with the model, we leave it in. But if there is like a dispute or if we do not agree with a certain outcome, we correct it. Or if we disagree among ourselves, like the team, we pause and we have a dialogue about it, and then decide on what the classification will be. And then this let's say this expert evaluation will then be used to incorporate the model with the human feedback. So it will be incorporated in the prompt that will be run in the next iteration using these examples. And we call it actually few shot examples based on the expert evaluation. So iteratively, the model becomes more robust while remaining transparent and accountable to human judgment. So every iteration of the model that you run on the corpus, and the corpus can also expanding, it will become more robust. Now, if we want to zoom now on this prompt repository, we can elaborate also a bit of our prompt strategy. How are we going to prompt the LLM to to gain the output that we require to do our analysis. Because it is critical how we design these to get trustworthy results. Now, you can just use research questions as a prompt like this. Which narratives frames are used in the following text paragraph? Is it suffering? Is it resilience? Is it agency? LLMs are already fairly accurate in this, we call it zero-shot prompting. So let's say asking questions out of the blue. But for this project, we want to ensure that the model is not hallucinating. And we need to mitigate this risk since we are located in a sensitive field of human rights. So to do so, for this example, for this research question, we are structuring the prompt in such a way that we first provide an extensive context. So what is the role of the LLM? How do we define these narrative frames? What is the definition from its narrative frame? But also what is the exact task? So we want to classify the each text segments, but we also want to retrieve the reasoning behind this classification. And last but not least, we want to also give a few examples for the few-shot learning. And by incorporating this in the prompt, you will actually embed the prompt with the human-in-the-loop evaluation done in a previous iteration. Now, how will we aggregate all these? How are we going to aggregate all the results in a presentable format or in a format that enables us as researchers to draw conclusions? So there are standard ways to do it. I mean, you can do a frequency analysis. For every document, you're going to, for the specific research question, you could determine the prevalence of each narrative frame for every document. You can also go a step further and do a trend analysis or longitudinal analysis. How have these narrative frames been evolved? How have they evolved in the past decades? But also you can do a comparative analysis. So you cluster according to geography or to language, document type, you name it, and then you do a comparison of these narrative frames. So, for example, in a certain cluster, say in Spanish, the resilience narrative frame can be more prominent, while in another cluster, let's say in English, this could be less prevalent. But we will also make use of the coming months, because these are rather standard ways of analysis. We also want to use the coming month to research if there are further methods to gain additional and more profound insights from the data. So how are we going to approach it? So we already mentioned that we want to conduct an iterative approach. We want to conduct the research in an iterative way. So there are several stages, each designed to expand the scope while ensuring robustness. So we begin with a one-stage back-truth commission, where and we call it the pilot, and where we have the official documents, we can access it, but also whether there is a parallel unofficial truth project. And also we are going to take a case where Tine is familiar with. And this allows us to critically evaluate the model's performance in the context we know well, so that we can iteratively improve the model as we expand the scope. And how does expanding the scope look like? So next we expand the entire set of Spanish language truth projects and build on the interpretive insights from the team. And this gives us a larger corpus, but still within a linguistic field we can evaluate carefully. Then afterwards we are going to bring in English, French, and Portuguese cases to test how well our approach travels across linguistic and cultural boundaries. So essentially Latin script to summarize. And then, of course, after that, we can scale up to a global corpus, including cases in non-Latin scripts. And this stage allows us to identify large-scale trends across time and regions. Now, beyond this, we will also experiment with applying an approach to unofficial truth projects. The steps that we have discussed were about, let's say, official truth projects, but we can also expand it to unofficial truth projects. For example, grassroots reports in Guatemala, but as well as to corpora related to, for example, court transcripts or NGO reports. So in this way, we will try to contribute to a more inclusive understanding of transitional justice. All right. Over to you, Tine.
Thank you. In terms of contributions, just very briefly, 1 minute. What I am excited about is just that cross-case analysis of victim participation, of course, and that's kind of the substantive contribution to be able to work with this very large corpus of real-world materials. But of course, we're also thinking in light of kind of the PostGenAI's program ambition of thinking more about AI and resilient societies, for example. There are, of course, also questions that we're trying to answer. On the one hand, regarding how LLM models whether they can be made more human rights sensitive, human rights centered, but also how these LLMs could be used to generate the kinds of insights that could contribute to more inclusive societies, to justice, not just transitional justice struggles, but more broadly to human rights and social justice struggles and research more generally. Part of how we want to do that, for example, the whole explanation, which may have been a bit technical, but that Jef just gave, the idea is, of course, to turn that into a protocol about the use of human-in-the-loop LLMs that is transparent, that is replicable also in other contexts. The slide we kept for last, not because it's an afterthought, but because we imagine it may be the one that people want to talk about most in the Q&A is about the challenges and the risks, of course. There's a number of risks and challenges they're not theoretical, they're very real. It's also the slide and the kind of document that we keep adding to with every conversation we have. But I think the way in which we're approaching it is that some of these challenges, they're real, but we hope to be able to address and to mitigate them. Those are mostly the technical ones. For example, regarding, how are we going to continuously update and revise frames and categories emerging when we add new cases to the analysis. Other challenges or risks we just, have to accept. For example, I'm thinking of the fact that our database is going to have gaps. Truth commissions, especially the older ones, their archives are not necessarily well maintained, or not everything may be digitized. Documents have very sketchy online afterlife sometimes. So that is a reality. But the most interesting conversations that we're having about this are mostly to do with kind of the more normative and ethical questions, of course, which are, for example, things like, if we are going to be training these models to become hopefully more human rights centric, more victim centric, is that something that we want to be doing on existing servers of existing software that is based mostly in the US, or do we consider that there's a potential risk, for example, when we work with transcripts, that is too great, and should we run it on our uni servers, which are closed off? So these are the kind of questions we're addressing. And I think what those questions show is that we are very much, or at least as far as I'm concerned, not coming to this topic from some sort of techno-optimism, but really from a curiosity about the potential to leverage these new tools, these advances in ways that are more human rights sensitive, whether it is at all possible to bridge those various very different perspectives, I would say, and also different disciplines in a way. I think the way in which we had to structure this presentation, I think a lot of us working in human rights are just fundamentally unaware of what the processes behind these large language models are, for example. So it's really also just an exercise in making that bridge. But as I said, we can leave that slide up or not, but we very much welcome your questions on these topics or anything else, not just the coming few minutes, but also the next couple of weeks. We'd love to engage more in conversation with you about this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, we have some time for questions. Elinor and then Sadi.
Hi, thank you both very much. I'm very interested in your project, largely because some time ago I wrote a book with a clinical psychologist about panic, and it's about panic narratives. And it really strikes me that, these are particular kind of panic. It's agoraphobia. So there's a lot of suffering that goes on in these narratives that we looked at both clinically and linguistically. And there's a lot of rumination about risk and what could happen and what did happen in the past and so on and so forth. But I was looking very carefully at your variables, and I don't know if this is too late or not interesting to you, but you have this notion of agency, which is crucial, I think. But there's something, in my opinion, that's missing and you could get, and which is equally important, which is grammatically or just semantically, meaning wise, you have agency, but then you need this patient. The notion of being an agent is great, but a patient in a transitive thing is someone who, or something, someone who's operated on, something happens to that person. And in the panic narratives, for example, you see tons of patient stuff, things happening to, and also another kind of case would be an experiencer, people experiencing this. But the patient is really important, and where the, who are the agents and who are the, the patients are really, I mean, there, and the reference that I want to give you is a reference of a semanticist who is no longer living right now. His name is Charles Fillmore, and he wrote about a kind of grammar called case grammar. So you get like, you get agents and possessives, like and experiencers and these patients. And the thing about the agent is this idea that you can also express agents in active sentences, transitive sentences, like somebody killed someone else.
Yeah.
Like that. But you can also get it in passives. So you can say, my son was killed, or something, my son was something, without the agent there. But you put the patient in the subject role, even if the agent is unknown.
Yeah.
You have the patient there, and that is really crucial. I mean, it was really crucial in the work that Lisa Capps says. If you're interested in the book, it's called Constructing Panic, and it's Harvard University Press. But this we got our energy from Charles Fillmore. It's
Thanks
too
a lot.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot. We're writing down those names, and we may come back to you because it's actually really interesting. And it is true that it's very similar to what we are also observing. And that's also throughout the presentation, for example, why, and also in the other work that we do, we always use the term victims-protagonists. A lot of people use victim survivors, etc. But for us, that's also really important to have that combined identity where that agency is already included in the name. And that's also in this project why our first question is exactly that. Are people being spoken about, or do they get to speak? And I think that overlaps with the example that you gave about my son has been murdered, for example, right? So that is for us a very important first question. And Jef, I don't know, do you want to speak? Because I know we have been discussing this issue of parsing out and making these subcategories of groups of text that people speak and being spoken about, but the technicality is maybe something you want to address.
Well, that is indeed what. Oh, go for it.
No.
Okay. No, well, technical. So So technically speaking, that is something that you could also analyze. So in what sense that you need to we say you can analyze text, whether they are I call it spoken about or when they are speaking, and that's the first thing. But it's also a matter of to do let's say let's say we call it the pre-processing step of the data of the text, and to see or to detect when there are victims protagonists speaking, or when they are spoken about. So it is also something that we need to also figure out how LLMs are performing in that sense. Are they able to actually find these nuances in the text? Are they capable of indeed classifying, if I may wrongly say it, but classifying whether how they are spoken about? And that is for us still a bit of an unknown, but it's also for us to discover in the coming months whether LLMs are capable of doing that. And we also have to be honest about it at the end of the project, right? If it's not able, then it's also something that's also for us collective wisdom, like, and we have also to well, just share it with the community that there are LLMs might be lacking in that sense, right? But thank you for your question, and also for the recommendation. That's really appreciated.
Great. Sadi next.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, obviously, that's the future of qualitative research, and as you both know, we're up to our necks in the same kind of thing. So, I've got a few questions, but I wanted to be sure that I understand. So, basically, you're cutting your corpus into speech turns. You're doing RAG on this with an LLM. You're getting codes. You're learning from the coding, and you're refeeding this in prompts, right?
That's right. Yeah.
The model is not learning. Okay.
No.
Okay.
No, it's not that we retrain the model itself.
You
The
don't
model is
retrain.
already trained in based on the large corpus, but we can do, let's say, a guidance of, we can create a context where the LLM has to operate, and to, let's say, use that context to do the categorization or do that reasoning. So
And
you're right. You're
right.
right.
So basically, you're refining the prompts, right? And so you're giving more context. You're giving better and better prompts, right?
Yes.
So and you did not consider embeddings or
It's a possibility. Yeah. So another approach that we were thinking about is actually that you select an open source model. You get that open source model, you deploy it on a on-site or an on-site server. It could be from your institution, and then you actually retrain the first layer. It's not the same. Yeah, it's what you mentioned. Like, there may be some nuances, but you can call it word embedding, so to say. Create maybe this dictionary for an LLM to base self. But yeah, these might be then two options that can also be explored, to either do the retraining of the first layer of your LLM, or work with some kind of embeddings. Yeah. So the reasoning also behind this, why we are using this, let's say, human in the loop, is typically in natural language processing projects, pre-LLMs, is that you had always this step where scientists of group of research had to manually annotate social media posts, like 500 social media posts have to be manually annotated, and that will be, let's say, some kind of training for 1 million social media posts, right? But this is also quite heavy, This is also very time intensive. But we want to have, let's say, be more sensitive with our time, because LLMs are pretty well performed regarding a few shot let's say zero-shot learning, but few-shot learning is already a boost in performance, and that is actually what we want to exploit a bit here. That's with creating this context with maybe if we have here like 50 examples of these for the few-shot learning, this would be already a pretty good repository to provide this context to an LLM.
What out of curiosity, which LLMs have you tested so far?
Well, we've been working around with OpenAI LLMs, so ChatGPT essentially. So number 5 at the moment. But we were also thinking about like to do competition is maybe not really the best way to frame, but actually use 2 LLMs, especially if we want to analyze how the LLM is doing for not so prevalent language. So if we take truth commissions from Sri Lanka, so the training data in all LLMs for Sri Lanka is not really that large compared to English and Spanish. So it's also something that we were thinking about. Okay, if we take 2 LLMs like the one from OpenAI, Gemini, or an open source one, our assumption is that it converges for English and Spanish, but maybe for Sri Lanka or less prevalent languages that they might diverge a bit. So that's why we might think to use more than 1 LLM to do the project with.
Okay. We've got many more questions, but we'll have time, so I don't want to take more. Yeah.
Happy to have that conversation. Thank you, Sadi.
Wonderful. I have 2 more people and not much time, so if this could be brief, please, and you'll have plenty of time to discuss over lunch the other days. So I have Matti and then Alienor.
Yes, thanks. I just leave this as a comment. I'm a bit on the lines of Sadi, and first I wanted to emphasize that you can actually work with multilingual materials. This is the strength of these models, that you actually have an excellent case where you have materials in so many different languages. And another point is that exactly describe better what the human can do in the loop. It's a different thing to revise the prompt, and it's a different thing to actually train the model again. And with the newest commercial models, you cannot do that. So be clear what you can do with ChatGPT-5, for example. It's a closed one, so you can work with the prompt, but you cannot really train it again.
That's right.
Excellent. We'll have more discussions later. Great work.
Thanks, Matti.
First, I must say congratulations for the slides because they are really, really nice. So congrats for that. My question is less technical than normative, actually. And it deals with the prioritization of your research, because if I get you well, maybe it's more the part of Tine, but the idea is to better understand the victim point of view, in the human victim point of view of Truth Commission. But then I'm wondering why you start by the comparison between official truth projects, and then you end up with comparing this official with non or less official documents. But it seems a bit odd for me, because if the focus is on the victim, then I would start with comparing official and non-official documents, and then maybe generalize it or upscaling it to Latin or non-Latin groups of documents. But the entry point would be the victim, and I think this would appear much more in non-official documents compared to official documents than starting with the global thing and then looking at the unofficial documents. So it's about the prioritization, the normative justification for that.
Yeah, thanks. You are actually pointing to a frustration that I had when we had a conversation about feasibility. No, but I think a first point in all seriousness is that I think there's a bit of a nuance in the sense that maybe we're not so much trying to understand the point of view of the victims, but trying to understand why it is that victims are represented in one way or another. I continue to believe that if we want to understand the point of view of victims of protagonists, we still need qualitative research and we still need to do that anthropological work. And if that is really the intention, then I'm not sure that this method is best used for that. What I'm really interested in when we started talking about this project is the capacity to build a database, to build an oversight of narratives, for example, that can then also be used by others to say, hey, look, we're going to be looking at, for example, how the organizing body has or may have or may not have an influence on some trends that we see here. So I think here it's more kind of why do we see the narratives that we're seeing than the actual kind of deep anthropological understanding is one thing. The other thing, I very much agree, I would love to also have the unofficial truth projects, what we have from the get-go. The reality we have there is that there's a huge definitional debate over what is an unofficial truth project. Already formal truth commission, there's a million definitions out there. And if you start calling something an unofficial debate, we are both from the Belgian context there. For example, there was a parliamentary commission on Belgium's colonial past. Is that a truth commission? Is it not a truth commission? Is it formal? Is it not formal because it was in the parliament? In response to that, a group of African descent women launched their own truth initiative, but then it kind of died or ceased to be because there was no funding. Do you count it? Do you not count it? Because it never published a report. So your universe of cases just expands exponentially. And I think the idea is for us to work with what is an unstructured corpus, but still with some scalability in a way, and to come up with a protocol that is relevant and that can then also be used for people that do want to have a closer look at these unofficial truth projects, including myself. But this is in a way first step to go to that. But I very much agree with you that those are the ones that are really interesting more so than the formal ones. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. This is all the time we have for this part. So thank you so much, Jef and Tine, for your presentation.